thinking about this for a while, and I'm sure many people will respond to the question of this video's title with, absolutely, of course Sonic should have AAA games. And to be clear, this is not me saying that I don't want AAA Sonic games. I think that'd be awesome. But that doesn't necessarily mean it would be the right choice. It wouldn't necessarily be the smart thing to do for the series, both financially, but also just doing what's right for Sonic games and delivering them in the way that makes the most sense. Financially, AAA games in some ways make a lot of sense, but also can be risky. They have high production values and big budgets, which hopefully means the games can be bigger and more epic and cool and appealing, and they can get a lot of sales that way and make a lot of money. But on the flip side, if they don't manage to get those sales, then that is a big financial investment into something that doesn't make its money back and can lead to really big losses. So the question becomes, how high do we think the potential of Sonic to make a lot of money and sell a lot of copies really is? And to be honest, I don't really think that Sonic as a franchise has that much appeal and financial potential. To which I'm sure many people will reply, well, look at Sonic Frontiers, the most recent 3D Sonic game and the best-selling 3D Sonic game of all time. Which is true, but there are a number of things about that bring Frontiers' success into question for me. First things first, gaming is a lot bigger than it was in 2000, so while Sonic Frontiers in raw numbers might have done better than previous Sonic games, proportionally to the size of the gaming industry, I don't think it's as big of a deal as something like Sonic Adventure or even Sonic Heroes, honestly. Like, if we want to look at massive AAA successes, if you look at something like Mario Odyssey, you're selling like 15, 20 million copies, somewhere around there. Even something like Assassin's Creed, which for a long time was annual, releasing a new game every year, they'd always sell like 7 million copies every single time. And Frontiers is not at the level of any of those things. And to be honest, I kind of doubt if Sonic as a franchise has the potential to hit that level of success. Frontiers did well, yeah, but how much of that game's success is because it's a Sonic game? I think probably not that much. I think much more of that game's sales came from the fact that it's very clearly aping off of Breath of the Wild and that game's style and trying to appeal to fans of those kinds of games. It's a trend-chasing game. It's trying to hop on the latest popular games and do what they do in hopes of bringing in fans who normally would not be interested in a Sonic game. So when you're making a derivative game like Sonic Frontiers, the question becomes, what does your game have to offer that the initial trendsetter or other derivatives of it don't already have? And really the only thing Frontiers has going for it is the fact that it's a Sonic game. Which there's definitely some unique appeal there, because no other games really have quite the same kind of gameplay as Sonic does, and being able to run around an open world like this as quickly as you can is not something you get anywhere else. So there is something there, but how powerful of a draw is that, really? Breath of the Wild, but it's a Sonic game. Compare it to other Breath of the Wild derivative games like Genshin Impact or Elden Ring, they have done much better than Sonic Frontiers has, because what they offer to that kind of formula is clearly much more appealing to general audiences. You know, from the Sonic fan perspective, we might look at Frontiers as a Sonic game that is open world, but I think for general audiences, it's an open world game that's Sonic. And especially considering Frontiers came out right along the same time as Elden Ring did, it's not a very favorable comparison. If you like Breath of the Wild and you want to get another game like that, what are you gonna grab? The game by a developer with an incredibly rocky history for a franchise that in many ways is a laughingstock to most people? Or are you gonna get the game from the super critically acclaimed studio that has made massive hit after massive hit, multiple in a row, and this game plays just like all of those games? I wonder which one is more appealing, and lo, Elden Ring outsells Sonic Frontiers like 6 times over. Of course, there are other factors that go into that, like marketing and such, but the main thing I'm trying to get across here is that if Sonic needs to rely on the appeal of other games to get good sales, then what does that tell you about the appeal of Sonic itself? If Sega thought that Sonic on its own had the potential to draw in a massive audience and get huge sales, then they wouldn't have felt the need to make a Breath of the Wild-like game with the Sonic franchise. The fact that they've done that means that they think that making a knockoff Breath of the Wild will sell more than just making a straightforward direct Sonic game. And truthfully, I agree with them. I think that was probably the right decision. If instead of Frontiers, they just made another typical run-of-the-mill 3D Sonic game, even if it was really, really good, I do not think that would have sold as well as Frontiers. And this is a problem for me as someone that really likes Sonic games, because it means Sega is financially motivated to make Sonic games that don't necessarily appeal to Sonic fans, because they'll find much greater success in trying to appeal to new fans and people that are interested in other kinds of games. And of course, there's nothing wrong with trying to bring in new fans, but if those new fans aren't interested in the Sonic parts of these Sonic games, then isn't that kind of a problem? Personally, I don't want to see Sonic games that are nothing but hopping on whatever's popular and whatever's trendy at the time. I don't want Sonic to be doing Zelda things, I want Sonic to be doing Sonic things. Yet, as much as I hate to admit it, if I imagine a really big budget, high production value, AAA 3D Sonic game that is 100% pure Sonic, it's not hopping on any trends, it's not trying to copy anything else, it's just trying to be a fantastic Sonic game, I don't think that game would do super well without some kind of additional appeal on top of it. And this is where I started thinking that maybe doing big budget, mass appeal games isn't the right direction for Sonic, because maybe you can make more sales and more money that way, but then you're not really making Sonic games anymore. You're just making games that exploit the Sonic IP to make as much money as possible. I would much rather have actual, real Sonic games. But the only way Sega would be interested in doing that is if there could be a profit made out of it. So if Sonic games don't have the market appeal to sell millions upon millions of copies, then perhaps the answer is to stop trying to make that happen. Instead of trying to make big-budget Sonic games that appeal to as many audiences as possible and try to make as much money as you can, maybe make smaller budget games that can turn a profit from the people that are interested in Sonic games. Now, I'm sure some people would argue that there is an audience for Sonic games out there, because look at the original games, look at how much they sold. But truthfully, I kind of see that as a bit of a fluke, because when you look at what Sonic games are, they are not mass appeal games. They're platformers, yes, but they are high-speed action platformers with a lot of depth that have an emphasis on mastery, speedrunning, that kind of thing. And those are not games that do very well and appeal to general audiences. The only reason I think the original Sonic games were as big of successes as they were is, one, because of Sega's very aggressive marketing for them, and two, because they were quite significantly better games than most of what was available at the time. But nowadays, there's a lot more games out there that are a lot better, and so now audiences don't have to go to something like Sonic, they can go to things that are generally more appealing to them. And I think we can see that this is at least partially true when we look at modern indie games that are very directly inspired by Sonic. A lot of them haven't really done super well. Penny's Big Breakaway, for example, didn't have huge sales, and in fact, just recently they announced that they had to lay off some staff, most likely because the game did not hit the sales that they needed it to. Then you look at something like Freedom Planet. First game was a big success, but then Freedom Planet 2 comes out, it's bigger and better than the first game in literally every single way, and it seems like it did not sell as well as the first one did. Why do you think that is? Why are these fantastic Sonic-like games not selling very well? Of course, there are going to be many factors that contribute to this, but personally, I feel like the biggest one might be that there's just not that many people that care about these kinds of games. Maybe not even that many Sonic fans who care. You'd think that Sonic fans would be all over these kinds of games, but I've come to realize that I don't think a lot of Sonic fans really care about the gameplay of the games that much. I think many people care a lot more about the stories, the world, the characters, all that kind of thing. So a game like this ain't gonna sell well unless it has a blue hedgehog in it, unfortunately. So if these kinds of games aren't going to sell well unless they have a brand name attached to it, and that brand name doesn't even really have that much pull to begin with, then maybe instead of trying to fight against these things and turn Sonic into something bigger than it is, maybe the better call and what's right for the games themselves is to accept that Sonic isn't the biggest thing in the world and stop trying to make it that. Just look at Sonic Mania. That game was a huge success, and we know it was a huge success because of Mania Plus. I'm gonna guarantee you that was not in the plans prior to the game's release. It only exists because Mania did so well. At the same time, though, within its first year, Sonic Mania only sold 1 million copies, and we don't know how many it's sold by now, but it's not the hugest selling game in the world. Yet it's still a massive success because it's not nearly as much of an investment for Sega as something like a Sonic Frontiers is. Might not make as much money in total, but proportionally against the amount of money that goes into making the game, perhaps that is a smarter thing to do with Sonic. Smaller, lower budget games that don't need to make as much money to turn a profit. With lower stakes and lower risk, Sonic doesn't need to desperately try to cling on to whatever's the popular trend right now. Instead, you focus on making small, quality Sonic games that are really good, that can do well within the niche of Sonic, and hopefully word of mouth can help them spread to greater success. I feel like that's probably the place that Sonic should be in Sega's portfolio. Some people might take issue with these ideas, with Sonic being Sega's mascot and him having so much historical importance. It feels like a franchise that should be treated as something very valuable, but that reality I just don't think is there, and I don't think it has to be there. I don't think that Sonic needs to be one of Sega's cornerstone franchises. Like, yeah, if you look back in the day with the original games or the adventure games, those were certainly AAA, but gaming has changed a lot, and now something like Sonic 3 and Knuckles can literally be made by one person. These games just aren't AAA anymore. And for a long time, it feels like Sonic has been trying to grow into what the shifting standard of a AAA game is, rather than just staying where it belongs, maybe. And I started to really think this as I've been playing a lot of indie games that are in a similar niche to Sonic, and seeing how much can be done and how good these games can be without having hundreds of millions of dollars behind them. Like this one game, for example, Demon Turf, that I was playing. This game is so freaking good, and it's packed with content. It's a really fun 3D platformer with lots of cool movement stuff in here. And it's got 4 worlds, each of them has a boss and like 7 levels each, but then once you beat the world, they make a remixed version of every level, so you got twice as many levels in the game there. Plus you got collectibles to go for, and time trials to achieve on every level, and a bunch of challenge levels that you can try. There's actually a lot of stuff in this game. It took me like 20 hours to do a 100% playthrough here, and it felt like everything I could ever ask for from this kind of game. And I was thinking, if there was a Sonic game with precisely this level of production value, I'd be so happy with that. I think that would be fantastic. It's a simple, focused game that knows what it is, it knows what it's trying to do, it knows who its audience is, and it just does that really, really well. And Demon Turf, for what it is, was a big success. They did a standalone DLC for it, and it had a big free update where they added this whole extra mode with this one really long, super difficult level where it's a tower you're climbing to the top of. And they just did that for free and threw it out there. You don't do something like that if a game does not turn out to be a big success. And the developer's next game looks like it's going to be an even bigger and more ambitious project. So clearly Demon Turf did really well for the developer and the publisher. And I'll guarantee you this game did not sell 5 million copies, because it doesn't have to. And maybe Sonic doesn't have to either. Is there a world I could envision where a Sonic game could sell like 10 million copies? Yeah, maybe, but we are not living in that world, and to get to that world, I think it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of investment, a lot of smart decisions, and a lot of good games. Sonic needs to build up goodwill with general audiences to have any hopes of getting something even close to that. But even then, I wonder if there might be a ceiling to how successful a Sonic game even can be.